Welcome to GamecockPod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of South Carolina.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivers for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick lays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for August the 2nd, episode number 1267. And normally we would go straight to our new Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines. Well, let's go ahead and bring in the man himself, the host of that SEC podcast, and now the new co-star of the Paul Feinbaum Show, Michael W. Bratton. How you doing, my friend? It's good to see you.
Yeah, doing great, Keith. Doing well, man. How are you?
I am doing fine. So I got to get your reaction. Last week, Colorado jumped from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. I kind of thought it was pretty funny when they asked Dan Lanning his thoughts about it. Now there are rumors abound. I didn't really buy into Clemson and Florida State leaving the ACC, but I spoke to a very good source this morning who had breakfast with perhaps one of the largest donors of IPTAY, and Chris Nee from the 24/7 Sports Network has talked seriously about this. And I think it is definitely a possibility that Colorado may have set off a chain of events that cause another seismic shift in college football realignment. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't really heard anything about that. I don't know. I didn't even know they played football still out west. I thought they gave that up years ago because I don't see them in the playoff anytime soon or anything like that. And anytime they play an SEC school, it seems like that's an easy W for the SEC. But
even Tulane against Southern Cal last year.
I mean, it's fun to talk about, certainly, but I think even with Texas and Oklahoma, how long that's taken to get them to the SEC. I think it's a lot harder than people make it out to be. So I don't really get caught up in the rumors. That's great. I know all these ACC schools are locked into a grant of rights, so good luck paying all that. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma couldn't even pay their exit fee out of the Big 12 quicker than I thought they would. So I don't know. It's interesting speculation for sure, but unless the SEC expands to Arizona, I don't really give a damn about any of those, to be honest with you.
I mean, look, I'm probably in the minority, and nobody would love to see Clemson playing in Madison, Wisconsin in late November on Fox at 8 o'clock, and it's 19 degrees and the field is covered with snow. I would enjoy that, just as I would enjoy watching Clemson play in the Horseshoe at 12 noon and it's snowing in November, or the Big House, or in Champaign, Illinois. I mean, those are different kind of games than they're used to playing, obviously.
Is
But
that good?
I'll,
Is that good for college football though? I don't know that it is.
well, I don't either. I mean, I don't know that it's good for Southern Cal and UCLA to be, playing at Rutgers in women's tennis and softball,
It's
and
not, and
traveling all over
I
the
think it's going to be
country.
a disaster for all of them. I've lived in Los Angeles after I graduated from Tennessee. I lived out there. They don't care about college football, and now they got NFL teams there. They care about the Dodgers. They care about the Lakers. They do not care. And when Southern Cal won, what was it, 2 national championships, going for a third, they cared then. If they get to that, and they're not sniffing that. I mean, this is not a joke, Keith. I've said this before. UCLA football fans are the equivalent to Vanderbilt fans. And that may be disrespectful, but it's absolutely true. Go look at the attendance at UCLA, and it doesn't matter how good or bad they are. It's the exact same as Vanderbilt. So, yeah, credit to the Big Ten for going out west, getting that LA market where they don't care about college football. That's tremendous. They can sell that in their rights package, and they already have. But it's not going to help their conference. It's not going to make it better. It's just going to hurt fans on the West Coast. And hey, that's all. These people making these decisions, that's all they care about. They don't care about the fans. They don't care about the players. They don't even care about the programs that they're over. They're worried about making TV dollars, and they got their TV dollars. So more power to them. But the guy that was in charge of that, he's already back in the NFL. He didn't give a damn.
I mean, let's face it, the Pac-12. I mean, even if you're in LA and you don't stay at the right hotel, you can't watch Southern Cal and UCLA in your hotel room because they may not have the Pac-12 network. And now they're losing Southern Cal and UCLA. They're losing Colorado. Say what you will, Colorado has not really been relevant since Cordell Stewart, and they got the 5th down back in the 20th century. But Deion Sanders is one of the more interesting figures in the history of college football. Mm-hmm. They've lost that to the Big 12. And I think, if I'm the Big 12, I might as well go ahead and take all that Nike money with Oregon and Washington and Arizona State, and basically just fold up that league. I mean, I think 2 years from now, the Pac-12 may not even exist. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, not that it exists really to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Keith, you're kind of asking me a lot of stuff. I have no knowledge on any. I'm not kidding when I say Pac-12 is irrelevant to me unless they're playing an SEC. So I don't know. I mean, it sounds like they're in a tough spot, to put it kindly. But I do see I don't know, if I'm Oregon and Washington, do I really want to do that? And then you're not playing Oregon State, you're not playing Washington State, and I don't know if that makes. I think Oregon's path to the playoff is easier in the Pac-12 for obvious reasons. So I don't know if I would want to do it but again, they do what Phil Knight wants to do up there. They're not trying to get TV money up at Oregon. They're trying to keep Phil Knight happy, and he's chasing a championship.
Well, no doubt about it. So, Michael, let's get to what you do know, and that is the SEC, as you are the host of that SEC podcast, although there are a lot of Gamecock fans that are wondering about the depth of your knowledge with some of your preseason predictions that we'll get into later. Yesterday, South Carolina sent shockwaves through the SEC with an August 1st edition of 5-star defensive end Dylan Stewart. Every analyst in the country basically thinks that have talked to college coaches, they all say this guy is the premier pass rusher in the country, and another 5-star from the Washington, D.C. area, the second in the last 6 months for Shane Beamer, adding Nicholas Harbor in February. Just your thoughts on the Gamecocks adding a player of the stature of Dylan Stewart and the continued success in the DMV area for Shane Beamer and company?
Well, he committed to South Carolina, so I look forward to him being downgraded to a 4-star. I think that's how these recruiting services work. But no, it's pretty awesome for the Gamecocks, and I put this out there and I stand by it. I think Shane Beamer is building a playoff contending program here in Columbia. Now, of course, when I say that, that's people freak out, but again, they're expanding the playoff to 12 teams. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying he's got a top 4 program right now. I wouldn't even say they got a top 12 program right now, but in a year or two, certainly I think they could be there with the recruiting that they're doing. And both years, Beamer's been there. He's exceeded expectations and maybe the best special teams in the country. I mean, those are the things you got to do to exceed expectations. So, I mean, it's massively impressive. And, I mean, everything you said about Dylan Stewart is true. All the big programs in the country wanted him. He's going to play for Shane Beamer at South Carolina. So, I mean, it's a coup. That's kind of the best way to put it.
I mean, anytime you beat Ohio State, Georgia, Gamecock fans have felt the pain this year recruiting defensive linemen against Georgia. They lost 4 head-to-head battles with Georgia. 3 defensive tackles and 1 defensive end. And so to pick up a guy like Dylan Stewart, I've always coined the phrase the summer of Shane. This year it was the spring of Shane, and now I think the late summer of Shane has started, because I think the Gamecocks are going to have a huge August in recruiting. They are the crystal ball favorites for 2 more ESPN top 160 players. There are other players that were hitting up Gamecock coaches yesterday saying, "Hey, I just saw Dylan Stewart. You got room for me?" I think, it's just a huge win for South Carolina. And I was going to do this in our news and notes segment, but South Carolina has not signed a lot of 5-star players. But every single one, going back to Marcus Lattimore, he committed the day before National Signing Day. Jadeveon Clowney waited until February the 14th, which was 12 days past National Signing Day, to commit on his birthday. Jordan Birch committed on National Signing Day in December, didn't sign until February. Nicholas Harbor went all the way to February. And so this is the first time South Carolina has had a 5-star player particularly of the stature of Dylan Stewart, commit to them in the summertime, where he can help build recruiting momentum, and is certainly a guy that other prospects nationally are going to take a look at and say, "Wow, he's going there. Maybe I need to think about going there."
Yeah, perhaps, but I mean, I do think I think that's the nature of recruiting now, Keith, where it's all sped up. I mean, you talk about February. I mean, when we get to this February, I mean, the top 300 guys, I would be surprised if 10 of them are left on the board. I mean, everybody's signing in December. Not everybody, but virtually everybody. And with official visits in the spring now, the whole thing's sped up. So not surprised to see this is the first time South Carolina doing it. Shane, that's the Shane Beamer effect for you there, with just the way they're able to recruit talent to Columbia. But I don't think this will be the last time South Carolina lands a 5-star before the season begins.
All right, so let's go back to SEC Media Days. Just, it was in Nashville. I know it's normally been in Hoover. They've had it in Atlanta a couple of times. How was Music City and the media days. And outside of Lane Kiffin, who was, some of the more interesting people that you heard from, like maybe the top 2 or 3 coaches, the most interesting statements? I mean, Lane looked like he had just come off a 3-day bender when he stepped up to the microphone. But I do think there was a lot of truth in his comments about name, image, and likeness and pay for play right now, with no congressional oversight, no national NIL umbrella. It's kind of like the Wild West out there. Your thoughts on what he had to say, and then maybe a couple of the other more interesting coaches and their comments at SEC Media Days.
Well, to be honest with you, Keith, I'm kind of tired of hearing Lane Kiffin complain. I mean, the guy's making $9 million. Cry me a river. He can go coach high school football. They don't have NIL issues or transfer portal. And last time I checked, he goes by the Portal King, and he wears that with a badge of honor. He brings in 30 transfers a year. This is the guy that we're sitting here complaining about NIL and transfer portal. Give me a break. Also, Ole Miss, one of the leading NIL teams in the country, not just the SEC, the entire country. I think people get surprised when they hear that, but it's true. They're winning bidding wars for a lot of these players. And when those rumors were going around that he may go to Auburn, what did he say? He said, hey, that helped our NIL. So he's kind of talking out both sides of his mouth. I think he's trying to get people distracted from the fact that they absolutely tanked in December. I mean, they were a top 10 team. They finished unranked. So, sorry, that Lane Kiffin's at my damn door knocking now. He's madder than hell that I said that. But it's true. I mean, crap. Yeah. But to your other point with coach comments, I don't know. Media days is just not. It's just not as fun as it used to be with coach comments. These guys are so buttoned up; they won't say anything of value. It's kind of disappointing.
I mean, there's no Steve Spurrier anymore.
Right.
So, hey, Michael, could I ask you to maybe turn up the volume on your microphone? Some of the folks in the chat box are having a little problems with the volume.
Yeah. Hold on. Ah, shit. All right, hold on. I think I got to get this. Hold on.
All right. So Mike is dealing with Lane Kiffin at his front door. So a couple of news and notes to pass along before Mike comes back in. That's just the beauty of live podcasting. So shout out to Beverly Smith. Not only does she land the National High School Player of the Year in Sage Marjetko from Illinois, the USA Today National Softball Player of the Year. Today, she adds an All-American and 3-time Pac-12 pitcher from Stanford, Elena Valder, who's a native of Kansas City, Missouri. So shout out to her. Obviously, Gamecocks still basking in the glory of Dylan Stewart committing yesterday. By the way, Dylan Stewart had that plan because his position coach and recruiter, Sterling Lucas, they induced labor on his wife. He had twin daughters yesterday, and Dylan Stewart wanted to commit to South Carolina on the day that his position coach's twin daughters were born. So I thought that was pretty cool. You saw him on the FaceTime with Shane Beamer with kind of like the OR that looks like a shower cap when Dylan Stewart committed yesterday morning. But the Gamecocks are waiting on a number of 4-star athletes who are yet to announce in the month of August, 4-star wide receiver Jonathan Paylor, set to announce on Friday. I still think it's NC State, but he is in communication with South Carolina. Saturday, 4-star cornerback Jalewis Solomon from South Georgia. J.C. Sherbert and Tony Morell of thebigspur.com add their crystal ball picks for him to South Carolina, joining Steve Wiltfong and Brian Dawn in issuing crystal ball picks for Jalewis Solomon. And I can tell you, South Carolina's coaching staff thinks he could potentially be a 3-year guy and then off to the NFL. And then on August 23rd, 4-star running back Daniel Hill from Meridian, Mississippi, is set to announce between Alabama and South Carolina. And believe it or not, and it's probably because of the depth situation, I think Alabama's got like 3 or 4 or 5-star running backs stacked up. This guy was the state of Mississippi state champion in the 110 high hurdles and the 300-meter intermediate hurdles at 6'1", 225 pounds. That would give South Carolina 10 commitments from the ESPN 300. That would be the first time that has ever happened, and it could happen by the end of August. And if they get Paylor, it will be 11 of the ESPN 300. So big things happening with Gamecock recruiting. So, Michael, did you take care of Lane Kiffin? Did you give him a bottle or a beer? Or
yeah, I sent him packing for all his dumb NIL comments.
All right. So, I mean, getting back to media days, I mean, I've talked to a number of media members, like they didn't even choose to attend this year because it's just not the same. Some websites didn't even send anybody up there because, like you said, you know, everybody, I mean, even Jimbo, you know, this year was buttoned up. Last year he cut it loose, you know, with his feud with Nick Saban and Texas and Oklahoma joining the league and all of that. How about players? And so when you interviewed Spencer Rattler and you told him you had him pick number 9 in the quarterback rankings, and not in the country, but in the SEC, what was that conversation like?
Yeah, I was very impressed with Spencer Rattler, getting to talk with him. Seemed like, true leader of that football program. And, again, it seems like a lot of those guys, they're certainly coached up for events like this, for things thrown their way like that. But I don't think even he was ready to hear that. So he was pretty surprised. He handled it very professionally, I'll say that. And then off camera, it was a little bit more interesting. I mean, he was still very professional, but it was the reaction I got off camera was the one I was hoping to get on camera with him. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, I think totally unfazed. Again, I mean, I try to give him all this credit, and he just deflect all the teammates, all the coaches. So I was very impressed with Spencer Rattler.
Any other player interviews really stick out to you, guys that came to SEC Media Days?
Yeah, the Alabama lineman J.C. Latham, he seemed, like they really, really are bothered by the disappointing. It's funny, we're sitting here saying, what were they, 11-2? But that is a disappointment for Alabama. He stood out. KJ Jefferson was another great interview we had. Really appreciated getting to meet with him and talk with him. Let's see, other players. Jaden Daniels was another really good one. I thought Brock Bowers was pretty impressive. We didn't get a chance we tried to get Joe Milton. We didn't get a chance, but I didn't realize just how massive that guy really is. I mean, he's like 6'7", It seemed like he was like 280. I mean, he's built like a Greek god. I see why people fall in love with him, but just stature wise, I mean, he looked as big as some of the defensive linemen at the event.
So he was bigger than KJ Jefferson?
Significantly, yeah. I thought so, and thicker.
Wow.
But he can't run like KJ, unfortunately. There's only one KJ. That's why I got him number 1 in my quarterback rankings.
You know what? I do too. I thought it was very close between him and Jaden Daniels at the top. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with either one of those guys. I think it's going to be very interesting with Dan Enos coming over to Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because he met with the Philadelphia Eagles staff last summer and helped them devise a package for Jalen Hurts that had him in a leading position to be the MVP of the National Football League until he got injured. And I thought he did a tremendous job with Tunga Valoa, to his younger brother at Maryland. I mean, they didn't lose many games because of their offense. It was basically because they couldn't stop anybody.
Right.
And you know, they led Ohio State for about 56 minutes of that game. Ohio State went up late and then it got a pick six or a scoop and score late, and the game wasn't as close as you know, the score was not as close as the game was. And so I think that's very interesting with Kendall Briles out, Dan Enos in. And so this is the last year of divisions. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on the SEC media polls. I thought no surprise at the top in the SEC East. Clearly, to me, it's Georgia and Tennessee at the top. The media did differ significantly after that from your SEC predictions. They have South Carolina 3rd, Kentucky 4th, Florida 5th, Missouri 6th, and Vanderbilt 7th. I think in my predictions, I think I had South Carolina 3rd, Missouri 4th, Kentucky 5th, and I really was tempted to put Florida dead last. I think Sunbelt Billy's in over his head. But how does Vanderbilt get 8 first-place votes in the East? How does that happen? I mean, is that just a mockery or?
I think it's just, I mean, no disrespect, but I think it's 8 people that are old, and the ballot is all electronic, and I think they meant to vote them last, and they voted them first. I mean, that's the only thing I can come up with.
I mean, even for the SEC champion balloting, Vanderbilt got just as many votes as Tennessee, which was tied for 4th most votes to win the SEC. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's an opioid issue, or some guys were having too much Irish coffee when they cast their ballots.
Well, and I think that just goes to show, I mean, what that's really, that poll is worth, and it's basically worthless. So I don't really get too caught up in it. I announce what the poll is, and then I basically move on with my life, because it is kind of a joke. I wish they would change the way they do it, and they never will. But here's the thing, Keith. I mean, like, we would both agree, right? There's a ton of people that cover the South Carolina Gamecocks that know that team inside out, know it better than anybody. Where do they vote South Carolina? That's what I'm interested in. They can't tell me about Auburn's roster. They can't tell me about Alabama's roster. So why are they voting Alabama and Auburn, where they're going to be in the West? It doesn't make any sense. So the way I do it, whatever team you cover, cast a vote where you think they'll go in their division. Of course, we're going away from divisions, but just vote where you think they'll be in the SEC. I think that'd be a lot more interesting poll and a lot more accurate poll. And I'm sure there'd be some ties and whatnot, but I think those are the people that know their teams best. And in fairness, they don't know all the other. Now, South Carolina writers, they know Tennessee well. They know Kentucky well because they play them every year. But again, about half the conference they don't know hardly anything about. So I don't understand what is the value of their vote when we're talking teams they don't even cover or have much knowledge on.
I mean, I agree. So obviously this is the last year of divisions, and I'm just curious how, like, I don't know as much about Alabama as I do South Carolina, but I do try to follow everybody in the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, this is the first time in a long time where we don't really know who Alabama's quarterback's going to be. Maybe it's going to be Milroe, maybe Ty Simpson rallies, but I mean, they have significant quarterback issues for the first time in a long time, and that is the most important position on the field, and they haven't exactly been able to just line it up and run it at people like they used to do. And so I don't know how you vote, how people, not you in particular, but the media, they vote Alabama number one over LSU, who took them down. And quite frankly, LSU returns a legitimate Heisman Trophy candidate in Jaden Daniels and a lot of other really good football players. I mean, we could go back to the East, but I mean, to me, it's Georgia and Tennessee, and quite frankly, you could just pick names out of a hat in the preseason. We got to see how it shakes out. But in the West, to me, I think LSU is clearly the front runner. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, Keith. I got Alabama third on my ballot, and I mean,
saw that.
That's pretty wild to a lot of people, but I call it the decaying dynasty for a reason, Keith. I mean, I think Nick Saban's the greatest coach in college football history. I don't even think that's debatable at this point, but that doesn't mean he's the greatest right now. And clearly he's not, because they're having penalty after penalty after penalty in a lot of road games. They're losing to teams they shouldn't lose to. Questionable decisions in the LSU game. Went for it on multiple two-point conversions that they didn't need to go for. They didn't get either one. That's why that game went in overtime, that they lost on a two-point play. And even on that two-point play, everybody remembers LSU winning it. What they don't remember, there was a timeout before, commercial, and then here comes Alabama. They had too many men on the field. In the game-defining play, Alabama had too many men on the field. These are coaching issues. Coaching is not elite right now at Alabama, and bringing in Tommy Rees ain't the answer, brother. So, I mean, I thought that was a laughable offensive coordinator hire. They wanted Jeremy Pruitt at defensive coordinator, who we all know he's a god-awful head coach, but he is a really good defensive coordinator, and we know why they couldn't even bring him in. So, Kevin Steele, I thought he did a tremendous job when he was at Auburn. He's been in the league a long time. So I'm not saying that's a huge downgrade, but I certainly would rather have Jeremy Pruitt and his Chick-fil-A bags than Kevin Steele as defensive coordinator. So, I mean, I think he's mismanaging the game. He's mismanaging coaching hires. And you referenced the quarterback. I mean, the kid they brought in from Notre Dame, no disrespect, but that's troubling. That was very troubling considering just what he's shown on the football field. If that's their quarterback, I mean, 3 may be too high for Alabama.
Maybe Nick Saban's hired too many former Will Muschamp assistant coaches. I mean, there's a lot of them on that staff.
Yeah, and to your point, hey, they've not been able to line up and run at people like they used to. And when they hired Coach Wolf there on the offensive line, Kentucky was happy to see him go. And we saw what Kentucky's O-line was last year. Well, that's the state Wolford left it in. That Kentucky is legitimately like O-line U in the SEC, or at least they were. But we saw the product of bad coaching, bad development, bad identifying, and now that's Alabama's offensive line coach. And wouldn't you know it, they're having troubles on the offensive line.
and at tight end and at secondary. Even though Nick Saban used to be the secondary coach, Travaris Robinson is no Torian Gray, that's for sure.
Right. No, it was all Pete Golding's fault. He was the mastermind of Alabama, some people believe. How
Well, now
laughable is that?
Yeah, he's Lane Kiffin's problem now,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
All right, so we got to talk about the quarterback rankings, and in particular, what were you thinking? How much did you had to drink when Spencer Rattler came out ninth? I mean, were you picking him out of a hat, or
No,
was that
I
the
go off what I
cousin-
see on the field, Keith.
the cousin Shane influence? Or
I can find you 500 Gamecock fans that wanted him benched last year. And these are all the same people saying he's the best quarterback in the SEC that wanted his ass benched. Now, all of a sudden, that's a hot take that he's been inconsistent for 3 football seasons, that the offensive line is a huge question mark, that the offensive coordinator has never called a play in college football and has been, not by me, but he has been rated as the worst play caller in NFL history by one outlet. You put all these together, I don't even think that's that bold of a take.
All right, so I don't know about in history, but the one that I saw when he was ranked dead last, did you notice the name right above him? It was a guy named Kyle Shanahan, who was rated 31st, and Dow Loggins was rated 32nd.
So that vindicates Dow Loggins?
I'm not saying it vindicates him.
Okay.
But what I am saying is I think guys that leave college and go to the NFL, they have a lot of problems because it's a different deal. Right. Dealing with grown men, with players that make way more money than you do, a salary cap, the fact you don't get to pick your roster.
Mm-hmm.
But guys that have spent a long time in the National Football League have generally been successful in college football. And Dow Loggins didn't just come straight from the NFL. He spent a spring with Mike Yurcich at Penn State. Then he spent 2 years at Arkansas with the pit boss and Kendall Briles. And I think that's given him a really great perspective on the fact that unlike the previous offensive coordinator at South Carolina, who spent his entire career at mid-major programs and then had a cup of coffee in the NFL, we don't even say him by his name. We call him Captain Dumbass here, okay? He was ranked the worst coordinator in the SEC by a guy well-respected that you had on your show last year. He had a cup of coffee in the NFL. He thought he could run put in 120 plays a week and 18 personnel groupings.
Yeah.
Dow Loggins has done that, but he's also seen for over 2 years in college football, you can't do that because that's their job. You get 2 hours a day at practice and meeting room time, and that's it. And I've heard nothing but great comments, even from outside. Greg McElroy, SEC Media Days, a guy who's been very critical of South Carolina since in 2014 in the inception of the SEC network when he picked them to be in the college football playoff. And then they got boat raced by Texas A&M on opening night. He's been very critical of South Carolina since then. Even he had positive things to say. You listen to people inside the building. I mean, you have to be pretty good at your job to spend 15 years in the National Football League. And I think South Carolina's offense is going to be scaled down just like it was last year at the end of the season. He's going to meet the players where they are. And you're going from 15-word plays to 1 or 2-word plays, which will help Rattler. I think they'll marry the scheme with the offensive line. And so I'm really anticipating a much improved South Carolina offense. And let me give you some stats here that were compiled by my good friend Jamie Bradford. All right, if you take South Carolina's main playmakers that are around Spencer Rattler, DeCarian Joyner, Juju McDowell, Mario Anderson, who did play 4 years of college football at the Division II level and was a D2 equivalency of the Heisman Trophy finalist there. Trey Knox, who's coming from Arkansas. Joshua Simon, a record-setting tight end from Western Kentucky. Juice Wells, Xavier Legette, Eddie Lewis, transfer from Memphis, and Amarian Brown. That's 35 years of college football experience, over 10,000 yards of total offense, 123 touchdowns, 195 SEC games played, 73 SEC starts, and 356 college football games played. Spencer Rattler, and that doesn't even take into consideration that guy named Nick Harbor. That is a wealth of experience surrounding a veteran quarterback now who's in his 5th year of college. He's a redshirt senior, and his 2nd year at South Carolina, who I think is much more comfortable heading into this season than he was last season.
Well, I mean, those are impressive stats, but again, a new system with a coordinator that's never called a play in college football, with North Carolina in the opener, with at Georgia week 3, with Mississippi State week 4, which is a defensive program with a defensive-minded head coach, and then at Tennessee. So, I mean, Georgia and Tennessee and Mississippi State and even North Carolina's got impressive stats too. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe it all works out. A lot of those guys you referenced did those stats you threw out too. I mean, they did it at lower levels. They did it at, different divisions, different conferences, not against the schedule I just laid out in front of you. So I just got there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of inconsistencies with Spencer Rattler. And I mean, are you the guy we saw for 1 or 2 games, or are you the guy we've seen for 10 games? I mean, I lean towards 10, but I could be absolutely wrong, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, I mean, even in the Clemson game, where he gets credit for some amazing throws, for a comeback win on the road, something that no one has done in what was the streak, like 40-something plus games. He also threw a pick 6. Also threw a really bad interception in the end zone that should not have been thrown. I mean, even in these games we're saying these are the best games he's had as a Gamecock, he's still making terrible, terrible plays. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe I could be dead wrong. Last year, Keith, I had Stetson Bennett in this same poll 10th. He was a Heisman finalist. So, hey, I'm wrong about as often as I'm right. But I promise you, I was not drunk when I put that rankings together. Well, I may have been drinking when we did the recording, but I come to those episodes with the list in hand already. I wasn't doing it on the fly.
All right, so I know earlier this week you were talking about, you and Cousin Shane, about, what happens after you get to 6 wins or week 6, with the teams and maybe re-ranking. So one of the questions my patrons have for you is, would you be willing to come back on the show in week 7 and re-rank your SEC quarterbacks from the preseason, and we'll see where Spencer Rattler is at that point?
No, because midseason is worthless. There'll be a lot of non-conference games there. I think it's the end of the season is what I'm ranking here.
All right, fair enough. They asked me to ask the question, and I did. All right, so
I buried Will Levis this time too last year, and Kentucky fans called me crazy. And I praised him when he did well. I called him out when he did poorly. I mean, I'm a Tennessee grad. I don't hide that like some people try to hide their, affiliations and whatnot. But I think I'm fair to all the players. I think I am, but maybe I'm not. But that's for them to judge, I guess.
all right, so South Carolina does host Mississippi State at the end of September. You got Mississippi State ranked dead last in the SEC West, even below Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was that kind of a coin flip situation? I mean, granted, Mike Leach is not there. They're running a different offense now. But I mean, Will Rogers, I mean, I definitely agree. That dude is one of the top 4 quarterbacks in the SEC. But why so low on Mississippi State?
Well, you have to consider that division, of course. I mean, yes, you say dead last in the West. That's accurate to say. But we're also talking just by far and away, I think, the most competitive, deep division in all of college sports, and only second to the SEC East in my mind. But so you could be last in the West and still be a top 25, top 30 program, which I firmly believe Mississippi State is. But I just think blowing up, which is essentially what they're doing on the offensive side of the ball, everything. I'll put it to you this way, Keith, and I've heard Will Rogers say this. He's never played with his back to the football in his entire career. In high school, he ran the air raid. He ran the Mike Leach air raid in high school. So his entire football career, they're going to ask him to go under center. They're going to ask him to do play action. They're going to ask him to have his back to the defense. He's never done that in his life. And not just him, but that entire offensive line, it's built for the air raid. It's built for the wide splits. They're going away from that. Keith, they have not had a tight end on their roster. This is incredible. I didn't believe this when I first heard this, but it's true. They haven't had a tight end on their roster since the first year of Joe Moorhead, which is 3 coaches ago now. So, I mean, the transition is massive at Mississippi State right now. And they do have a solid defense. They return the 12th most production on the defensive side of the ball in the SEC. So, next to last. So I think the defense will still be stingy because Zach Arnett is such a great coach. And they kept his linebackers coach, Matt Brock, is now the defensive coordinator. So I don't think they're going to be awful on defense. I don't think they're going to be awful on offense either. But there's a transition there. And they get games like South Carolina, which I think most years you'd say maybe that's a toss-up game, but it's in Columbia. I heavily favor South Carolina in that game. Who else they catch the first 6 games? They catch LSU at home. They catch Alabama at home. 2 top 5 teams. I don't know. I think it's just going to be tough for Mississippi State this fall, and I'd be happy to be dead wrong on them too. But I just think the transition is going to be rough.
All right, so why so high on Jackson Dart?
Well, a lot of that
you have him ranked number 3. I mean, even above Will Rogers, Joe Milton, and Connor Weigman.
Mm-hmm.
Why
Again,
so high
this is at the end of the season, so I'm projecting at the end. But Lane Kiffin, year 2, quarterback-friendly system. I think he's got the best running back in the country behind him. The Lane train, he's got it cooking down there with the running game. Every year he's been down there, they've ranked 1 or 2 in SEC rushing yards in the SEC, excuse me. So I think they're going to be a machine again on the ground with Judkins, and Ulysses Bennett is a heck of a number 2 option. So that's going to take a lot of pressure off of Jackson Dart. They've raided the transfer portal once again for receivers. Zakai Franklin, all-time leading receiver in UTSA history. They got him on the roster. Trey Harris, over 1,000 yards receiving last year. I think he's got over 150 catches in his college career. They added a tight end from Memphis, Priestcorn, which is really good. They're bringing back tight end Michael Trigg. So he's going to have some weapons there. But I think just like Matt Corral a couple years ago, kind of shaky that first year under Lane. Year 2, big jump. They won 10 regular season games that had never been done in Ole Miss history. I think Ole Miss, we see a similar type jump. And Jackson Dart really started to come on late, particularly that Egg Bowl. He had a heck of a game. Year 2 in the system. He's won over the locker room. I realize they bring in other quarterbacks, but hey, Lane Kiffin, I know I called him out earlier on the NIL. He has kind of mastered that system, Keith. Every quarterback on his roster is a transfer. So what does that mean? That means when they name a starter in fall, none of them can transfer out without having to sit out a season, which is kind of making it pointless to transfer. So they're basically all locked in there. And he won the job in spring. They've not come out and said it yet, but only one interception. That was something that plagued him last fall. A lot of head-scratching turnovers. He was only 19 years old. First time as a true starting quarterback, and it's in the SEC, in the West, which they went 7-0, playing a cupcake schedule, and then at the back end, things got real, and they got exposed a little bit. So year 2 jump for Jackson Dart. I think Ole Miss is going to be one of the most dangerous teams in the SEC this fall.
All right, so just in the last few minutes here, let's talk about South Carolina. You mentioned the schedule. I'm not as bullish on North Carolina as many. I just think it's a lot like Texas under Mac Brown. I think they're very soft as a program. I think South Carolina is going to handle them. Obviously, until it happens, right? I'm not picking South Carolina to beat Georgia, especially in Athens between the hedges. But for the first time in a while now, really since he's been at Georgia, Kirby Smart dealing with a guy that's never taken a significant snap in his life in college football, and Carson Beck. I mean, is this because of the weapons and the players around Carson Beck? I mean, how do you expect him to perform? And plus, let's face it, I mean, other than Tennessee, hell, South Carolina may be Georgia's toughest game on their schedule this year.
Well, you say he's not done it with a quarterback that's not taken a snap. That's not quite accurate. Jake Fromm had no experience, and they took him to the national championship. They lost that championship game. That was the famous Alabama, what was it, 2nd and 26 or what have you. But yeah, I mean, Carson Beck just surrounded by. I mean, I think they got the best offensive line in the country. They probably have the best player in the country in Brock Bowers. South Carolina fans should know Oscar Delp. They know that name well. They also got, I hear rave reviews about a third tight end. Once again, they're just loaded. Lawson Lucky, that's a name to remember for Georgia fans. They bring in Dominic Lovett from Missouri. He was arguably the best slot receiver, short of maybe Jalen Hyatt in the SEC last year. I mean, just absolutely incredibly loaded. And they go about 4 or 5 deep at running back too. So I think Carson Beck, I probably would have put him higher if I had actually seen him do it in a meaningful snap. It's kind of why I put him where I put him. But I think he'll have a big year for the Bulldogs this year.
All right, so fair or unfair for South Carolina, defensive coordinator Clayton White is on the hot seat this year. South Carolina last year, 198 yards per game allowed on the ground. I mean, to me, that has got to improve this season for South Carolina to go where they want to go and to continue their upward trajectory in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, I think every coach in the SEC is on the hot seat. I really do. And I know we throw out these crazy contracts and everybody thinks we're good. And, you got one bad year. And I won't even say Clayton White had a bad year, but I think it was less than expected. Yeah, I mean, of course. Particularly with that slate right out the gate with North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi State, Tennessee, some potential high-flying offenses there, particularly Georgia and Tennessee. I mean, they have got to be better defending the run, and in Clayton White's defense, I mean, I think some of that is not having the roster that some of these others do, particularly at linebacker, and had some banged up defensive linemen last year. So you have to take all that into consideration. But with what seemingly is an upgrade at offensive coordinator, everybody thinks Dow Loggains is going to be awesome. He may very well be best special teams coordinator in the country in Pete Limbo. I don't think he can have a below average defensive coordinator at South Carolina. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say he's got something to prove this fall.
All right, so as we wrap it up here, just obviously you picked South Carolina 5th in the East. What do you think maybe the overall record is? Will South Carolina be bowl bound? Can they get to 8 wins in your view? What kind of football team are you expecting in year 3 for Shane Beamer?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I would be stunned if they don't go to a bowl game. And 8 games, not out of the question at all. So I'm not big into projections, record predictions or anything like that, but 6, 7, 8 wins, I think anywhere in that range is what you're expecting for the Gamecocks. But again, I mean, it's a murderer's row, Keith, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the most impressive thing I think Shane Beamer has done, and it's a long list of things he's done that are impressive. I think the most impressive is snapping a lot of these streaks, bad streaks for Carolina, beating Kentucky, beating A&M, beating Clemson, beating Tennessee, snapped so many streaks. Got to get over that Missouri one. I don't know if they can do it. They certainly couldn't do it last year, and this year it's at Missouri. But can he keep those streaks in South Carolina's favor, going to Tennessee, going to A&M? I think that's a big ask to beat all those teams on the road, but that's what they're going to have to do to finish 2nd or 3rd in the East. I don't think they can do it. Clemson, I know Clemson comes to South Carolina, but of course, I hate Dabo almost as much as you do, Keith. So I'm not picking them to lose to Clemson by any means, but what will these fans say if, and I know we don't even want to entertain this thought, but what happens if South Carolina loses to Clemson? I'm not crazy enough to sit here and say they'll be out on Shane Beamer, but there'll be some upset fans saying, hey, we beat them last year at their house. How can we turn around and lose to them at home? There's going to be some questions there. So pressure's not the right word, but I think the momentum, all the momentum that South Carolina's got, and even though I've got them lower in my East standings, I think that's exactly where they want to be. They can prove the doubters like me wrong. They've been doing it the entire time. Just go out and do it again. But to keep that momentum, you gotta win some of these games. You don't gotta beat all of them, because Clemson, Tennessee, Texas A&M, they could all be top 15 teams. I mean, that's a tough ask to win all those games. We haven't even really talked much about Kentucky, but I think Kentucky is going to be one of the most improved teams. That's another one. You got to keep that streak going if you want to. Again, you can't be losing to these teams if you're going to finish 2nd or 3rd in the East. You got to win most of them, and again, that includes Missouri, who they've not beaten. So it's a tough ask. And that's kind of why I'm low on South Carolina. They could be even a better team than last year. I don't know if the record will reflect it, if that makes sense.
All right, so there was one question I did want to ask, and I forgot, but maybe the most interesting hire in the SEC outside of Hugh Freeze at Auburn is Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M. Jimbo gave the, political non-answer answer and couldn't even guarantee Petrino would be calling the plays. I mean, to me, that situation has the potential to really go off the rails, or if Jimbo lets Petrino do his thing, I mean, I am high on Connor Weigman, but just your thoughts on the Petrino Jimbo. I mean, Lane Kiffin's day to day, but I mean, you never know when Bobby Petrino may show up to work wearing a neck brace.
Yeah, no doubt. But no, I think it's a perfect hire for Jimbo, because he's awful as a play caller, he's awful as a quarterback developer, and those are kind of the strengths of Bobby Petrino. And he does it in a variety of ways. I mean, he's coached Lamar Jackson, he coached Ryan Mallett. I mean, you couldn't get more different quarterbacks than those two. So I think home run hire. But to your point, the fact that Jimbo won't even publicly cede that he's not going to be the one calling the plays, even though I've spoken to people that say without a shadow of a doubt it's Bobby Petrino calling the plays. The fact that Jimbo, I can't answer for Jimbo, but clearly that's bothering him, that he's not getting all the credit, that he's, if they do well, Jimbo wants that credit. If they do poorly, guarantee Jimbo's going to let everybody know. You know who's calling the plays? It was old Bobby P over there. So I don't know. That seems like a combustible situation, but they got the roster. They should be a college football playoff contender, but I got no faith in Jimbo. I'd be completely honest with you. I think he's holding the entire program back. I would have fired him a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, he reminds me of Holly Warlick when she was the head coach at Tennessee women's basketball. He just does less with more than about anybody around.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, so hey, Michael, I can't thank you enough for being with us. You got to let me know next time you're in my area, and hopefully we'll be able to hang out next year at Media Days in Dallas. I'll be making the trek up I-35 for that. Tell us what you've got coming up on that SEC podcast.
Yeah, just, we're daily. So every day we got a show. We got fall camps opening all across the SEC. So just keep them up with that. I mean, it's football time, Keith. We're basically done with list seasons talking. I'm so tired. We do a 365 college football show. I'm tired of talking about it. I want to see some football. But, we're going to be doing live shows, recaps, all that. You know all that stuff. So just search That SEC Podcast. We're available on all podcasting platforms, YouTube, or search me out, SEC Mike. Feel free to shout anything you want at me. I take no offense. I love the passion of SEC fans. Without the fans, Keith, we don't got these great jobs that we got. So I'm thankful, even for the negative comments. Keep them coming, because if we didn't get flooded, or at least hopefully, Keith, you don't get as many negative comments as I do, but I value the fact that these great fans, these Gamecock fans, Tennessee fans, Georgia fans, on and on and on, they care so much that they got to shout and yell. I love it, because without them, none of this exists.
That's right. So, hey, there were some folks that were wanting to check on Cousin Shane and make sure he's recovered from last year's South Carolina-Tennessee game. I know that was tough on him. How's he doing in his 7-step recovery process from that boat racing that literally caught everybody completely off guard, including yours truly?
But the biggest regret, Keith, of maybe in my life, is Shane and I watched that game together, and I didn't have any cameras on him, because that would have made for some gold content to just, every South Carolina touchdown, he's like, we can come back. We can come back. And it just, the depression in that man's body, face, everything. He didn't even finish the game. I think when Hendon Hooker left, he just said, "The hell with this." He got up and left. But boy, do I wish I would have captured that on video. I really do.
I mean, honestly, it was incredible. That was my biggest regret, is because, quite frankly, and I've told you this before, I thought Hendon Hooker was the best player in college football last season. And even though the outcome of that game was decided on, when he went down with that injury, I think it was already decided.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to seen him finish out the season. He certainly deserved to be a Heisman finalist. And quite frankly, I thought he should have won the Heisman last year, and think if he finishes out the season, I mean, he was the best player in college football last year.
Yeah, no, I had they beaten South Carolina, which again, we can sit here and what if everything, he probably does win the Heisman, and Tennessee would have went to the college football playoff. I think top 3, top 4, maybe even the top 2 team in the country. I really do think Tennessee was that good. course, they weren't that good at South Carolina. But, for the rest of the year, I mean, just incredible. I certainly didn't see 11 wins coming. I thought they'd be 9-win team. So credit to Josh Heupel and company. He's a hell of a coach.
No doubt about it. So I have jokingly said Josh Heupel more chins than wins over Shane Beamer, but a tall task this year that they may catch up to each other. So, Michael, always great to have you on. Thanks for everything you do and for your sense of humor. And look, if everybody's agreeing with you, then you're not really saying a whole lot. So right. I think, in this business, just like as an official, if you're kind of hearing it from both coaches, that probably means you're doing a good job and doing what we do. If you're hearing it from different fan bases, it probably means you're doing a good job and you do a great job. And so continued success, my friend. Thanks for being with us. And hopefully we can get you back on during the season at some point to talk SEC football after it really gets rolling.
Yeah.
So all the best to you and to Cousin Shane.
Thank you, Keith. We appreciate you, man. Have a good one.
All right. All right. That was Michael W. Bratton, host of That SEC Podcast. I'll be back with the Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines after this.
If you enjoy listening and watching the free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC Podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter @KAllset or follow the show on Twitter @GamecockPod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/GamecockPodDaily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, and welcome back to Gamecock Pod Live. Always great chopping it up with my good friend Michael W. Bratton, host of That SEC Podcast. So he popped in right at 1 o'clock. I wanted to get him on so we could spend as much time as possible talking SEC football. Man, he knocks it out of the park. He has strong opinions like somebody else you know. And so we'll see how it plays out, right? Like he said, last year he had Stetson Bennett ranked 9th or 10th in SEC quarterbacks, and he wound up leading Georgia. I said this to a good friend of mine. I thought Stetson Bennett was Georgia's Connor Shaw. I mean, he was just a lot like Connor Shaw last year. We'll see how Carson Beck does. You know, it is good to have a great defense and a great offensive line and be surrounded by great playmakers. And I think certainly Georgia has all of that. But who knows? Maybe, hell, we sure didn't see it coming in 2019 with Jake from State Farm when the Gamecocks went in there and Israel McQuamu had the pick six, and Tommy Suggs, take that. How about that, Georgia? Take that, Georgia. So cool stuff. So to Nana's Porch news notes and headlines, brought to you by Nana's Porch, an award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area. They will also be catering the Carolina Rise tailgate. More information coming on that. The tailgate will literally be in the shadow of Bank of America Stadium. Go to CarolinaRiseMembers.com. Buy a ticket. It's only $10. You'll get a meal. There's going to be plenty of special guests there. And if you don't buy a ticket, you may regret it because of a couple of potential guests that we think are going to be there. I'll be there. JC, Jamie Bradford, the whole crew will be there. Probably some Gamecock student athletes will be there and some other special guests as well. Great food from Nana's Porch. There'll be beverages available, only $10. There'll also be limited parking spaces available. So if you're planning on being in Charlotte, you'll want to come by the Carolina Rise tailgate that will get underway at 2:30 p.m. So I wanted to read this from Steve Wiltfong, who is the director of recruiting at 24/7 Sports. And honestly, the best guy that's left over there, on three has kind of rated them, taking Charles Power and Jerry Hamilton, who are two of the best in the business. And, Carolina Rise, if you're considering giving to a collective, Carolina Rise has two things that no other collective probably on the face of the earth has. And that's one, they have Park Avenue Sports, who are landing major deals for South Carolina student athletes like Aaliyah Boston, like Gigi Jackson, like Spencer Rattler, like Juice Wells, who leads all SEC athletes in name, image, and likeness deals. And Nicholas Harbor, who's got the Beats by Dre. He's got the Cologne deal. He's got his, trading card deal, and more deals in the works that will be announced. So you have that. And then you have J.C. Sherbert, who has been and was and still is, quite frankly, maybe one of the top overall evaluators of college football players in America. Okay. And so no other collective has those two things. Nobody has both an organization like Park Avenue and a guy like J.C. Sherbert, a former national director of recruiting for Shannon Terry at Rivals and at 24/7 Sports. So come on over, join Carolina Rise. I mean, they had Hillary Cox, who heads up name, image, and likeness at the University of South Carolina, on the Inside the Gamecocks, the show today, and she laid it out. So Garnet Trust is the official collective of South Carolina athletics because they entered into a 6-figure deal with Learfield Sports for the naming rights and to have paid advertisements broadcast at South Carolina home events. But Carolina Rise is just as important, and maybe more important, because of those two things that I said, because the ability when you are recruiting big time players like Nicholas Harbor and Dylan Stewart, Park Avenue Sports is a huge difference maker in the recruitment and retaining of your best players on your roster. And they are now under the umbrella of Carolina Rise and that collective. And so, I mean, that's a pretty compelling case. All right. So I did want to read this about Dylan Stewart. Like I said, South Carolina has never had a 5-star in the modern era of rankings, and a national guy like Dylan Stewart commit this early. Steve Wiltfong says, South Carolina winning out over Ohio State, what a massive recruiting win. Obviously, Shane Beamer has had some big recruiting wins since he got to Columbia, but Dylan Stewart was the most coveted pass rusher in the country this cycle. After quarterback, that is the position every year. In the NFL, it's all about elite pass rushers, elite quarterbacks, and elite cover corners. Those are the positions. And now wide receiver as well. For South Carolina to land what college coaches deem to be that guy, it's a guy that I would expect to come to South Carolina, be all SEC, and be a top 5 pick in the National Football League draft, if not the number 1 overall pick, depending on what the quarterbacks look like when he comes out. Again, you look at the way Coach Beamer and his staff are building this up through the recruiting trail. I absolutely love the way that they're recruiting on the offensive line. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. I think they are getting guys that are program changers for years to come to boast one of the most ferocious offensive lines in college football. Certainly, they've had some big wins in other areas, Dylan Stewart being the biggest one to date. I think this is just a powerful recruiting win. With South Carolina, everything is with a grain of salt to a certain degree about a young man's potential. But Dylan Stewart is as much a guarantee you can get coming from the high school ranks to be a good player in college. How good he ends up being is up to him. And obviously, South Carolina getting him there. And I would add, having a guy like Sterling Lucas, I mean, we saw the improvement of Jordan Birch and of Gilbert Edmond last year, right? But we got to keep these guys. That's where the collectives really come in. So back to Wiltfong, the Oracle, as he's known. This is just an exciting recruiting win. To beat Ohio State, to beat Larry Johnson. Certainly there were some other programs he considered, but Ohio State, they're a program that's annually in the hunt, and that's the hunt for the national championship and the college football playoff. And that's where South Carolina wants to be as a program. To get to that level, you've got to win these kinds of recruiting battles. There won't be a more impressive recruiting win in 2024 than South Carolina winning Dylan Stewart. Not because it's South Carolina winning Dylan Stewart. I don't want people to misconstrue that. But because they just landed the premier edge rusher in this class based on what college coaches think. So there you have it from the Oracle. So we talked about the other upcoming commitments. We talked about other players that are going to sit up and take notice of this. I can tell you right now, South Carolina's coaching staff thinks just as highly of Jalewis Solomon as Steve Wiltfong does of Dylan Stewart. A big-time cover corner that could come in and be 3 and done. Okay, they love Zamarian Lang, a big, raw 6'3" athlete who, quite frankly, may be a better natural athlete than both Jalewis Solomon and Cameron McHale. So South Carolina fans, take note of that, okay? Just like Fred Johnson from Norfolk, Virginia. When South Carolina landed him in June, he was just a 3-star guy that had been a wide receiver, and now he's catapulted up into the top 135 players in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. So there's no telling where Zamarian Lang may wind up, J. Lewis Solomon, where he could end up, okay? Daniel Hill, certainly anytime you're going against Alabama, that gives you pause, but we'll see what happens there. I think that looks really good for the Gamecocks. And then I'm really interested to see how much landing Dylan Stewart can impact Jonathan Paylor's decision. That's coming up on Friday, just a couple of days away. So, hey, thanks to everybody for joining in. If you're not a patron, you can sign up and get a free 7-day VIP subscription. You can join us on the Garnet and Black Town Hall, which we had last night. It's a very interactive Zoom call where everybody on the call can join in. We go to overtime after about an hour, and people really fire off, and a lot of inside scoop gets dropped. And so I also want to mention this, other than just a podcast platform, on Patreon, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, what really differentiates this show from every other show is the Garnet and Black Town Hall. We do it every single week. It's interactive. It's a VIP Zoom call. It's like being down, like I say, like my friend Jamie Bradford says on our promotional, it's like being down at your favorite sports bar and hanging out with a lot of your favorite Gamecocks, talking about the thing we love most, which is the Gamecocks. Now, another great feature we have is download the mobile app, the Patreon mobile app, and we have lounges, which is essentially like being in a big group text, okay, or a group chat. That's what it is. It's and we're adding scoop in real time there, okay. I've opened up the Cockaboose Club, which is going to be our VIP lounge. I've opened that up for all members this month, for our basic tier members and our VIP members. We're dropping scoop there on the regular. On Saturday, I dropped in a tidbit on Dylan Stewart and said, if I have a crystal ball pick for Dylan Stewart, it would be to South Carolina with a confidence level of 7, because I'd gotten a call or a text that led me to believe it was going to be South Carolina, and it was going to be sooner rather than later. I don't think anybody, it kind of caught us off guard when it happened yesterday morning. But nonetheless, very interactive group chat in the Cockaboose Lounge. A lot of people participating. I will say this, when you download the Patreon mobile app, there's a difference between Android and Apple devices, okay? The two bubbles, which is to get you to the chat room, if you're on an Android device, it will be in the bottom right-hand corner after you download the Patreon app. It may take some time for it to show up, because this is a brand new feature on Patreon, and because we are one of the very few Patreon creator sites to get access to this. And so they're still building it out. There is kind of a delay on the Apple devices for it to show up. Sometimes if you do it at night, maybe wait till the next morning on your Apple device, whether it's your iPad or your iPhone, The bubbles will be, there's 3 icons on the bottom part of the screen on the mobile app. The bubbles are on the far right-hand side on Android devices. The bubbles are in the middle on Apple devices. I don't know why. It's just a difference in those apps. But you can click in there. That'll take you to basically where all our lounges show up. Come on into the Cockaboose Club and join the conversation. That is another great add to Gamecock Pod Daily and Gamecock Pod Live. So come and join the conversation. Sign up for a week. You can join the Garnet and Black Town Hall. Check it out. You'll love it. I guarantee it. So coming up tomorrow will be part 2 of my interview with Ben Briner, breaking down the South Carolina defense. Yesterday, we did the defensive ends and defensive tackles. Tomorrow will be the linebackers, corners, nickels, and safeties. That's great stuff. And again, special thanks to all of you for joining us today. Keep coming back. Rate the show, subscribe, so you'll get a notification every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Start time. Great guests coming up. And so for all my patrons, you'll be back tomorrow. For all of you that are not patrons, come on over. Give us a try. You'll love it. I guarantee it. We're always looking to grow our Gamecock family. Very loyal. Can't wait to see a bunch of you guys and gals in Charlotte on September the 2nd. So thanks to Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. Go Gamecocks. God bless America and God protect our troops. I'm out of here.